And let's go ahead and get started with this. So, welcome to Breaking Out of the Silo. And thank you all for being here. I'm Shannon Collins with iParq, and I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation. Looks like we're getting a couple more people in. I'll go a little slower. I'm especially glad that this is a bit of a smaller group today. It gives us some space to create discussion rather than just a presentation. That being said, please feel free to ask questions as we go throughout the presentation. Drop them in the chat. There's no need to wait till the end. If for whatever reason we do not mention your question on that particular slide, rest assured we will circle back around at the end and make sure that your question is addressed. So when we talk about breaking out of the silo, what we're really talking about here is alignment between parking and IT, security, finance, and leadership. And so most organizations, they don't necessarily struggle because they lack technology. I mean, some do, but the vast majority do not. They're struggling because their systems and their departments are not fully connected with one another. So with that, let me quickly introduce the team that's going to support today's conversation. I'm going to start off with Jason Atkinson. He is our Senior Operations Specialist here at iParq. And Jason started parking back in 2012 as a campus officer, really learning the job from the ground up, like many of you. He stepped into that operations leadership role very early, quickly, and then he saw where systems were helping out and then where they weren't. A fun fact about Jason, he implemented and used the iParq system at his own campus first, and then came to work for iParq later. So his perspective has always been from that operator side. And now he spent 14 years focused on operations within iParq. He built the RPP, so residential permit program, from the ground up. He's helped implement the platform across, I think it's more than 100 agencies nationwide. So when Jason talks about operations, integrations, or breaking down silos, it's coming from that real world experience lens. So Jason understands what change actually looks like on the ground, both operationally and politically. Our second panelist is Lauren Santiano from EyeP Solutions. Many of you may already know her. She's been in the industry for quite some time as well. Lauren began her career at University Parking Office in 2010. So again, like many of us, she understands that operations from the inside out. And then over the years, of course, she's worked and managed more than 80 agencies, and that's both across the US and Canada. So she gives a really broad perspective on how different programs operate. Lauren was also an early advocate for LPR adoption, helping agencies think strategically about enforcement and compliance. And if that wasn't enough to her resume, Lauren previously served on the CMPA board. She's still involved, of course, but now she has shifted and brings her expertise to iEP Solutions. And that is where she focuses on LPR technology, security, and infrastructure. So Lauren really is a conduit. She connects operational strategy with the technology that supports it. And so today, Lauren's going to bring that broader ecosystem perspective into our conversation and how parking connects to IT, security, analytics, and that long-term infrastructure. And if you can bear with me for just a couple extra short minutes, I want to introduce two others from our team, Ashley Rodriguez from iParq, and she is our marketing specialist. And she is also going to be our courageous chat moderator today. So she'll be monitoring the chat and surfacing your questions so that we can address as many as possible. And then, of course, Nate Ferraco, he is as well from iParq leadership team. And he won't necessarily have a formal role in today's discussion, but values that opportunity to hear directly from agencies really about the challenges that you're navigating. So thank you, Nate, as well, for taking the time and being here today. I'm going to take a moment and let's shift our focus to why we're all really here. And that is we're taking a closer look at how silos show up in our day-to-day operations. And Lauren's going to kick us off by breaking that down from the integration and the strategy side. So Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks to the iParq team for putting on webinar series to talk about different topics. And as we started developing this between the two companies, we felt that this was a great topic to focus on as we feel like it's more and more interconnected than it ever has before. And so as Shannon was talking about, my background was in parking, as you can see, CMPA, working in university parking, working for another technology provider in the parking industry, and an early adopter of LPR. I chose to move over to IP solutions because I saw where not just the parking industry is going, but technology and security and infrastructure as a whole. We were only focusing on a one small but important but small piece of the puzzle. When parking works in that silo, we buy systems for a single moment in time and or specific department based. With in parking, you're focusing on revenue, you're focusing on compliance, order essentially, but maybe not thinking, and it's not intentional, but we're all focused on our own KPIs and our single things that we're trying to accomplish as managers or advocates in your particular department of a larger organization. And that's actually the point, is that you have a patchwork of vendors, disconnected platforms, and aging infrastructure when you're talking about it from an organization perspective, not just a police department and IT department, facilities, et cetera. You want to make sure that it's a more proactive, forward-thinking system rather than a reactionary-based system, and making sure duplicated efforts, do not occur as much as possible. And we'll get into that. That hidden cost of that brick wall. So that previous slide that I showed is this, literal showing brick wall between different departments. So this one example is parking doing their due diligence, IT doing their due diligence and their processes. That there is a hidden cost where no one owns the outcome, operations can't flow, and that critical data is not being shared. You need to make sure, as I mentioned, that maybe evaluating it beyond your own department and see if you can leverage existing infrastructure within your larger organization. Parking technically, and like with operations not flowing, for example, parking typically doesn't have dedicated IT support or an IT resource. And again, making generalizations, you can lead to siloed assistance and help. And, I have a customer that doesn't have an IT resource, and they have a system that is on premises, so it's not cloud. And so that makes us, meaning IP, supporting them a little bit more difficult because we can't remote into their system and make any changes. We're having to coordinate on site. But the point of that is to show there's a halt in operations based on how a system was designed, 10 years ago, and it's a policy and it's the way we've always done it. And is that a good enough reason? And it may be a yes or a no question. The critical data, we'll get more into this in a little bit, but hoarding data, again, not intentional, accidental, it's just the way you've always done it, prevents informed decision making. So if you don't know what the end goal of what your organization, and again, I'm saying organization beyond your own department, knowing where they're trying to go and making sure that all that information is being shared so informed decisions can be made. This conversation essentially shifts that foundation from different tools that you're using, to ownership. I wanted to talk about this slide a little bit. It's more of a general discussion, not about parking or technology, but just the modern workplace. There is a cost of that isolation. General study of isolation in the workplace high level summary is 6 to 10 hours per week reinventing the wheel. Can happen for a couple reasons. Colleague with the needed knowledge is unavailable. You're simply unaware that there's a process of being able to get that information on your own, but you end up asking a human being, and that causes delays. 60% of people experience difficulty obtaining information to do core parts of their job. And so I'm bringing these up so you can start thinking about what are the showstoppers in your day to day where it's the way we've always done it. And that doesn't even include the onboarding of, they estimate about more than 200 hours because the onboarding lacks the processes and skills so they can do their job more effectively. And that's where you have that being able to have that foundation of being able to share information. The everything is data. We talked about the aging infrastructure. You buy a tool, you're buying it and installing it, implementing it, supporting it for a particular reason, parking devices, parking software, security devices. But really, we all know it comes back to data. Those pieces of technology are giving us data points beyond that isolation and lack of crossover. Most organizations are probably only extracting about 10% about what these mines are worth, and that can be either the data that's being inputted. So we'll give LPR as an example of all the LPR reads that you get. Are you doing anything with that data? You have a retention period. Are you doing anything to get that data to be reportable and to see if there's any data points to that? That's an example. It's a behavioral data point. But if the different departments aren't talking to each other, so we'll give an example in just a second, but facilities can become involved when it's an access control badge. So not parking access control, but a badge that you get in. License plate readers are managed probably by parking or PD. Cameras managed by IT or PD, and I'll show that visual in just a second. And so that's where you're not able to share that data correctly and consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
I'll just pepper in here
absolutely.
when it comes to data and how that gets managed. It it's paramount, I think, is the best word I can come up with, to make sure that the different departments that are getting involved in the day-to-day operations are also getting access to either the same data or in conjunction with your primary data, something that correlates and adds to the bigger picture. So if you've got the parking department that has their set of data from the day-to-day ins and outs, permitting, spots being taken up, which parking lots are getting full faster, so on and so forth. There's lots of different data points that can come with that. But then you've also got another department on campus that wants to kind of tap into that and use some of those resources. If they can't access that same data, then things start to break down because they may end up just doing something on their own, not really coordinating or chiming in, and then the communication is lost, the barriers go up, and now the data that the parking office has is a little skewed because it's being interrupted unintentionally, perhaps, by another party. And so it's really about kind of coming together and realizing that everything we do or everything that could be done is a data point in some way, shape, or form. And if there's a way to bring that together and make it cohesive for everybody to understand, then the sky is the limit kind of after that.
Absolutely. And I actually have done so many LPR, and again, background is LPR, but wanting to build beyond parking and license plate recognition, for example, because you're able to share that data. A customer, actually, I was sold LPR to them. But I'll give the example, like when systems don't talk, that parking was using a certain LPR system for a very long time, and they never had any connection with PD. They were two separate entities, and PD had no interest in talking to parking. Parking had no interest in talking to PD. However, new management came in, as what happens, wanting to change things up, understanding what's the lay of the land, discovering, hey, why is parking using this system that can also do some of the video surveillance that we also do? Why aren't we all on the same platform? And so that's where I was telling Jason earlier, half of my job is connecting the dots to people within their own organization. And it's kind of silly when you say it out loud, but if you're so in the weeds and so focused on what you're trying to accomplish, which is very noble, that it's like, hey, this can make your life easier, PD, because parking has already vetted this particular vendor, this particular technology of being compliant with IT standards, for example. You can eliminate a whole ton of process of elimination on what your next steps are to reinvent your security department. And so, as I mentioned, half my job is making sure that people are talking to one another in their own department. It's giving that a little bit of that education. And we do this every day. iParq, IP, we talk with customers like those on the call every day. We see similarities, we see differences, everyone's slightly different, of course. But at the end of the day, we don't know your operation, and we will never know your operation as well as you do. It's us pointing out there are gaps. Here are some recommendations to maybe bring those gaps together if that is a higher priority for you to make lives easier, to leverage existing technology, et cetera. And so like in this particular example, LPR is read by one department. There's no connection to their badge reader system. So doors forced open 5 minutes later. So maybe you're tracking someone of interest. And then PD is owning the video system. But if no one, 3 different facilities, parking facilities and PD in the particular real world example I gave, there wouldn't be any connection to those until we identified those missing gaps. And so that's where you're able to kind of create those bridges and examples. But Jason, I know you had some examples from some of the installs you did.
Yeah, well, there's 2 in particular that come to mind. One was from a little while ago, but it's one of the larger schools I work with. They brought cameras onto the campus, all of which are fixed cameras, in hopes that they would also then use it for an LPR type service, only to then realize that the procurement folks that got the cameras didn't talk to the parking office that were going to use the cameras, and then realized that the cameras that they got weren't really going to do the job. And I forget how much money it was, but it was a lot. And it not necessarily, out the window, flushed away, but definitely not being able to utilize the system in the way that was originally intended. So then now they're faced with this conundrum of, what do we do? We're not able to talk to each other. Do we waste the hundreds of thousands of dollars that was spent here? Or do we spend just as much trying to implement something else and hope we can tie the 2 together? That was just one example. The other, very quickly, was more forward thinking, thankfully, and this was just a few weeks ago. They have a few fixed cameras, mainly for security purposes, but they happen to also point, at least some of them, point in the direction of lots where other cars might drive. And they're asking the question, can I leverage this technology to help with the checking of vehicles for hot lists, any kind of scofflaw information, something that would help the police department on campus actually do their job a little bit better. So it was kudos to them. And we're just starting to investigate that process to try and figure out where we can go. But it's that kind of conversation that really helps me, not as just the vendor, but also for themselves. It really helps push them forward in a way that allows them to check all of the different avenues they could go down, instead of just throwing money at something and then crossing their fingers that it might work out.
And adding on to that, Jason, that you brought up hot lists, which just wanted me to add to it, is that's almost the first, again, if we're talking parking and using some existing technology, I part of our implementation process, if they've never had LPR for parking before, is, hey, do you have any hot lists you want to use or scofflaws? And if
Mm-hmm.
parking is separate from PD, they always have this little surprised look on their face that I never thought about that before. I'll go down the hall and ask, or go to the other building and ask PD. Like they'll say right now, no, but hey, that's really good for us to know. So it's again, not intentional, but it's bridging the gap, saying, hey, the hot list, your officers don't have to interact with anyone that's on a hot list. It's a silent alert that's sent to PD, but you're already exposed as people, as enforcement officers, sworn or unsworn, already patrolling in some sense for you.
Yep. Yep.
And that's where it goes from that patchwork to that partnership. So patching it all together, hoping it works, and then having it more as a layered foundation.
If I can interject really quick here, I did have a question, and this might be a really good spot to ask this. Someone had sent this in earlier. And Jason, I'll direct it to you first. The question is, from your experience, where should we start if we already have multiple systems in place that don't integrate well?
Yeah, the conundrum. So in my experience with something like this, I tend to look at the system that has the most time used on it, for lack of better terms. Which system are you really using that provides the most information, the place that you're going to the most often to be able to kind of get through the day to day? Starting with that software, that solution, and talking to the folks that help provide it, that's where I would start the conversation of then saying, okay, vendor A, we have all of these other things that we're doing. How can we get them to talk to each other? And there's kind of two paths with that. There's the behind the scenes talking of how do we share data so that each one can benefit from the other. But more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but just as importantly, there's the kind of front facing path of how do we make it so that we as the user can see the connections and understand all the alignments? Because when that happens, that's when you can start to see trends. You can start to see areas that are really strong or maybe they're lacking. And then bringing all of those vendors together and having a large open table kind of discussion is a great way to get the cogwheels turning so that a solution for the big picture can start to come together. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but it's certainly something that is worth striving towards, I think is the best way to say it. So yeah, starting with, if they're not integrating well right now, start with the solution that is most heavily used, that you rely on the most, and then one by one, bring in the rest from there.
Yeah, and Jason, I know I've worked with iParq for many years as a partner, and mobile LPR is usually the foundation, how most people end up starting out with that type of technology. But then we as two companies have provided that insight to customers. If they're, yeah, mobile LPR has been great, they have the ROI, enforcement's going great, but hey, we're in the middle of evaluating an occupancy-based solution in our garages. And then that's where we can pause and say, hey, do you know if you added fixed LPR in your particular garages, you're not having to add on another, onboarding another vendor from a supporting perspective. It's going to be one pane of glass, and you're able to have more of that directed enforcement and having that visibility in the same system, accomplishing multiple things.
Yep, right on. Absolutely.
And that's where that awareness starts. I probably skipped ahead a little bit, but trends, watch lists, and anomalies as you're using that license plate recognition data. So there is retention periods that are set. There's some that's required by, if you're in California state, there's different requirements in different states, but you have that retention of data and metadata, and it's up to you on how you want to use it. And I have a couple of, they're not customers yet. They used to be my customers, and they've taken LPR data and exported it because they own the data into Power BI and creating different reports. So I'm not involved in that at all. They had a Power BI license. They're exporting the data and organizing it in a way that makes sense to them. Leadership needs to know some certain things. I don't know if I exactly remember the reason, but you're having that. And then education on the systems currently used. So I'm sure Jason, you did the residential, the RPP program. Those long-term iParq customers that have been using it, using just enforcement or citation processing for so long, and there was turnover in their organization, they're probably just using it because that's the way they've always done it. And then, you are educating them saying, hey, you can also add permits so you're not having those disconnected systems. People are just don't know.
Well, actually, I've never had to train a single person since then. So it was,
Oh, good.
So no, I'm just kidding. Uh, when new people come on and or current people that have been using the system for a long time shift into a different role, or they find a new employment opportunity, whatever it might be, there's always this kind of tension buildup of what do we do now? And having the data there and keeping in tune with like not working in a silo, it can really make the process so much easier and smoother, especially like when I'm viewing it from the outside, right? Because I'm not there, I'm not at the city or the campus or whatever it is. But when I can point them to specific data points in the system so that they can realize here's what's been happening and here's what you could do. And oh, by the way, I happen to talk to so on and so forth, and they've been doing it this way, and you should reach out to them. It really makes a big difference. So like a lot of the reports that can be available, especially when it comes to the enforcement side, will show you through data. So it's not just, well, I think this is happening. You can see the numbers, you can see the maps, you can see all the information that show you you should be in this location on this day between this time and this time, because that is when a lot of things are happening. And it's probably a good reason to figure out why. Or on the flip side, there's nothing happening over in this space, in this lot or this garage. Is it because everyone's behaving? Or is no one enforcing over there because they don't want to travel that far? So there's lots of insights to be learned, and having that open dialogue between the enforcement people and the permit people, because I've worked with folks where they are separated, even though you'd think they'd be in the same building, but they're not, and they don't talk to each other. But having that line of communication and then tapping into the data in the reports, it changes the game in that transitionary period as well. So you can really know what to do and when.
Yeah, and part of that is, you mentioned like citation, enforcement and permits are in the same department, but they don't talk to each other. And if people aren't aware and that cross collaboration isn't happening, people may not know there is an issue that may be occurring. So I think more data being shared, the better. And because I am now doing more than just parking and mobility and transportation, I am doing critical infrastructure, can't network surveillance systems and access control and badging. Sometimes I hate to say it, but people have budgets for surveillance and security when it comes to public safety. So securing a facility, securing a building, those types of things. But when there's gaps, I have a customer that I'm onboarding and they've had not a working badge system on some critical doors in their facility, and they haven't had the budget. And then, guess what? Now they surprisingly have a budget because something happened. And that's going back to the reactionary rather than the proactive. Like it stinks that something had to happen before action was taken.
Yep.
So being able to use data to see ahead into the future as possible things to improve.
Yep. Emerging trends. Absolutely.
Yep. And adding that visual context. So seeing the license plate here, and then being able to see it on like a surveillance camera, for example, and that can be configured in the backend system. So if you're looking for, like, let's say a hot list from the public safety side, and you see that hot list come in, you can coordinate where it's a camera, the PTZ, where it can pan, tilt, or zoom. If you see that car coming in, let's just say fixed LPR in a garage, it can then trigger the nearest camera to that entrance to go to that position and start recording, so you can see someone maybe getting out of the vehicle. And then you're able to have more data points of maybe where that person walked to. They walked to the west side of the garage or the southeast towards the residence halls. And then you're able to use other surveillance technology to kind of track that person and movements in case you are needing to investigate something. And body worn cameras, also, we are able to, excuse me, that I have been pushing just as a part of a critical infrastructure, not as much of a nice to have. Those that have seen me at CMPA and other conferences, tech conferences, I've been, screaming from the rooftops that body worn cameras need to be part of that critical infrastructure. And so CMPA, the California Mobility and Parking Association, as part of that, as a board member until December, they surveyed agencies, I believe in December, so pretty recent, to understand that body worn camera adoption. It's emerging, but not widespread. But as you use LPR, people have adopted LPR. If you're in parking, you have most likely non-sworn officers. So even if you're in PD, you have likely non-sworn officers, parking ambassadors, whatever you want to call it. But they are part of those, when I use that word ambassador, they're the ones that we all know that are on the street talking to the public, educating the public, answering questions, but then also, as we know, dealing with the ones that are not happy that are getting citations. And so that is protecting them from abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse. I had one customer, it's been a while since I've talked to that particular person, but they had a knife wielded on them and no body worn. So, you submit a police report, police is managing a different system. You have no body cam footage to show them. You don't know who the person is. And, what do you do with that information? And that's not okay. And then it's also protecting members of the public from abuse, just as we see on police body cams as well. So to me, and it's just an additional camera stream in your backend system. So it's a hardware purchase, it's a CapEx purchase, but it's just another video stream. Why not implement it? It's kind of what I say to people. And so hopefully it becomes more widespread. The solution in closing the loop. So together we can bridge our organizations to have cohesive security, parking, and technology deployments. And this can be a completely different webinar if iParq wants to host another webinar in their series. But AI, I didn't want to even get into AI, and that's the the buzzword trend of the day. It could be that another layer that could be added for additional insights, but it's still developing and understanding the role that it has to play in whatever space and whatever you're trying to accomplish. I was helping actually a coworker earlier this morning saying they want AI and it's for a surveillance system. And it's like, okay, that's great, but what are they trying to do? Because I don't want to throw something at them. And if they don't know what they want, we need to narrow down what you're trying to accomplish, what your current infrastructure is not able to give you. And is that critical? Because if it's not a good fit, it's another layer that you have to then manage. This is now the foundations that I've been showing is showing that different model entirely, where all that security data, parking data, enforcement data are unified in that intelligence layer. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Lauren, and Jason, for your expertise and insights on this topic. It was so good. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to switch, just kind of switch focus for just a moment. Again, for those of you who have questions, drop those questions in the chat. We did have a few questions that were sent our way ahead of time. So I'm going to pause here and I'll ask Jason and Lauren a question and maybe it sparks some interest for you. And again, do go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. But one question came over and it says, what are common integration mistakes you've seen organizations make during implementation? It's two-part. And then the second piece to that is how can you navigate effectively through those?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Um, the, I mean, literally the first thing that comes to mind is jumping the gun. So it doesn't really, I mean, you could put whatever you want in front of that as far as whatever the software, the technology, the hardware, whatever it might be. Unfortunately, I've I've been witness to in my own implementations where I'm told one thing and we start implementing that process, and then either right before it's finished or even right after it's finished, I suddenly find out, oh, that's not going to work. Uh,
No.
I suddenly, this other department has now been brought into the mix, and that's not going to work for them. So that that can get really challenging. And I guess the solution to that is, if we could go back in time, would be to find more stakeholders, see who else is involved or could be involved, and make sure that their 2 cents has been taken down and noted. And in this situation, that department just wasn't included at all. So that's why it became a problem. And our fix for that was essentially putting things on pause, allowing the client to address how they wanted to move forward on their own. And I just kind of stood to the side and offered guidance where I could. But as Lauren has said earlier, it's, I don't know their ins and outs like they do. So I could only really provide pointers when it became necessary. But it certainly delayed everything. It added on a lot more time. Even though we were technically done, nothing actually happened right away. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's definitely don't jump the gun. Get all the right people involved first, then we can go.
Yeah, and I'll
I
add to
like that. Stakeholders is key. And then I'm sorry, Lauren, go ahead, jump right in if you have some insight to add to that as well.
no, I think Jason, you're giving me flashbacks of some of that.
Sorry.
I think the only thing I would probably add to that is, let's just say stakeholders were probably necessary in the beginning are now involved in what you just talked about, Jason. That especially, but then also in any implementation, I think I've said this a couple of times earlier in this presentation, is that any new technology platform that you're implementing, there are going to be changes that you're probably not going to be a fan of. And the reason I'm saying that is because you are not familiar. And just because you do it a certain way now does not mean it's right or wrong. But when you implement a new system, I know iParq will do it. I know I definitely do it. Is I end up questioning, why are you doing it this way? Help me under. It's
Mm.
not to be antagonistic or confrontational, but tell me why you do it this way so I can understand. May not work in the same way that you get, but are you getting the same result at the end of the day? Whether it be a report, whether it be X feature, that type of thing. And it's to be more of a conversation and a partnership, not antagonistic by any means.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. 100% agreed.
Wonderful. There's one other question here. I mean, there's several questions, but there's one other one that I feel like it almost segues beautifully, and that is how do you suggest different departments better collaborate without stepping on each other's roles? This is a real world question right here.
Mm. Without stepping on each other's roles. You know, when it comes to the different departments getting involved, it's not uncommon to see certain individuals that you wouldn't think would be that interested suddenly have a great understanding of what's happening, and what they say should be taken as Bible, and it's really important that what they say is understood and done, carried out, even though they might be from a completely, well, not unrelated department, but a department that's not involved in the day-to-day operations. That's something I've seen before. It's really important to understand that even though it's a department and this is an implementation and we all have a job to do, we're also people, everyone's a human being, and this might just be a topic that they're passionate about. So I don't ever want to discount what that person's saying. I never want to just, okay, that's nice. Let me go talk to these other people now because they're the ones that I'm interested in. I always want to take into account everybody's thoughts, perspectives, feelings towards something. But I still have to kind of in the stakeholder chart of everything, make sure that everyone's in their correct spot so I know who to communicate with first, second, and third, how they prefer to be communicated with. It's all about that stakeholder engagement, essentially. So yeah, I don't want to discount anybody that kind of jumps into that, but at the same time, I have to make sure that the hierarchy, if you will, is kept to. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
a dance, but it's doable.
It looks like I'm just keeping an eye on time here. Again, just one quick little reminder. We're going to be wrapping up possibly a little bit earlier than we had anticipated. There are a couple more questions. But if you do have one of those burning questions, put them in the chat. We just want to make sure that we get to your specific question. Here's one, and either Jason or Lauren, you can tackle it. It's really up to you. Arm wrestle for it. Is it better to have, or is it better to replace a legacy system entirely, or look for ways to integrate with what you already have?
Loaded
Lauren, I'll let you start, but I'm sure I could add
Thanks,
2
Jason.
cents.
Thanks, Jason. Just kidding.
You're welcome.
I think the legacy, I think Jason, you talked about this in a couple of slides back, but what is the main system that you're using, and building off of that is a good first analysis. I'm not saying that's what you end up doing, but that's a good first analysis of what your called technology stack is. But when we say legacy, that can mean a few different things. And so we all know that technology is going away from proprietary to open architecture. That's not a secret in our industry, just technology in general. So I think you have to make sure that there's no proprietary limitations on your legacy. If it's working and it's supported by that company, et cetera, and it's open architecture, that's great. But those that are using proprietary, you're severely limiting yourselves for future expansion and future use, because you're going to have different stakeholders, different needs from leadership that you cannot foresee happening. And having that open architecture availability is really the only way. And I think having that hard analysis of your legacy systems, and if they are open architecture, they are supported, that will also point you in the direction that you need to go.
Yeah, I was going to say, it would be nice if there was a one-size-fits-all solution, but that's not always the case. But I think the question I have to ask myself if I'm in that shoes, which, when Shannon, you mentioned my background, that was definitely a question that I had to ask multiple times as we were trying to figure out our next steps in getting a software, was what's working right now and what isn't. And if what isn't working can be replaced, what do we use instead to make sure that we can handle the needs of right now, but also, as Lauren, you just very nicely said, needs of possibilities in the future. And those aren't always known. We may have, there might be goals as to where you could go to, but those can change if leadership changes. So it's really just a matter of perspective in the moment. Does the legacy system do what you need it to do? And will it sustain you in the future?
And I think one more quick thing to add is I brought up that example of maybe legacy customers that haven't been, I don't know, trained in a while, or they didn't get good training from their peers, may not know all the things that the license plate recognition system can do, or the surveillance system, or access control, or iParq, your permit management, the different modules or citation processing. And talking about the open architecture as I did, but then also educating yourself on your current technology stack. Are you using all of the modules? Did you know about all of the different services and products that this company provides? Because then that can also change your tune of how you analyze things as well. You're only using one module out of 10. Why is that? Can that be one that's eliminated? Or you can say, hey, if I keep with this company, I can add on the other two modules and reduce another vendor so you can consolidate a little bit more. And you didn't know that until you did that analysis. So I think also that education is necessary.
No, all good information. I think, there is definitely a common theme here that parking is not a standalone department anymore. It's a complete infrastructure. So, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today. So if it sparked any ideas specific to your environment, we're happy to continue the conversation. We'll leave our information up on the slide for a few minutes if you want to connect. Lauren, do you mind pulling that slide up? And yep, there we go. And then that way you can reach out to either Jason or to Lauren. And again, thank you everyone who jumped on the call today. And I hope that you found some little golden nuggets along the way to take back to your agencies and campuses. Thank you again. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.